Okay, picture this. It's a hot day. You're thirsty. And thanks to the power of advertising psychology, rather than quench your thirst with water, what you decide you really need is some highly caffeinated, fizzy sugar water. So you pop into the nearest shop, you buy a can of Coke, and you greedily glug it down. Maybe even stopping to wipe the condensation that's running down the side of the can across your face or even your abs if you're like really, really hot and you want the rest of the street to know it. All well and good. But then imagine you get home only to find a bunch of lawyers waiting for you on your doorstep. They've been hired to represent Pepsi, here to serve notice that you are being sued by the drinks company for loss of profits. Yes, your purchase of Coke has negatively affected Pepsi's bottom line. It sounds like a satire on dystopian corporate culture, doesn't it? But sadly, it's not. It's the actual world you live in right now. I know. Some of you thought you were living in a proper democracy where there were rules and regulations against that kind of thing. But unfortunately, no. In fact, we're really living in what I like to call a shopocracy, because half of me thinks I'm clever and the other half agrees. Now, the world in the shopocracy is run by a bunch of fucking shops and their uppity fucking shopkeepers. Now, I don't mean the local shops you pop in and out of on a weekly basis. They serve very important social and economic functions. No, when I say shops and uppity shopkeepers, I'm talking about corporations and their arrogant, self-important CEOs. Because they need reminding, all of them, that that's all they are. Amazon, you're just a fucking shop. Apple, you're just a fucking shop. X, you're just a fucking shop. And Bezos, Cook, Musk, and all the rest, you're just fucking shopkeepers. You might think you're important, that you're people of consequence, but you're not. In fact, you're not just no more important than the couple that runs the bakery at the end of my street. In most cases, you are actively worth a lot fucking less. Unfortunately, too many of the world's governments seem to disagree, and so we find ourselves living in a reality where a shop, just a fucking shop, can literally sue you because you decided not to buy today. That is the shopocracy in action. Whatever happened to all that free market bullshit? The creed of competition? If businesses want people to buy their shit, make good shit and price it fairly so people don't go elsewhere to buy it. But don't penalize people for shopping around or simply not wanting your shop at all. That's not free market economics, that's extortion. Although, admittedly, it's getting harder and harder to tell the difference these days. Just consider the utter insanity of the situation that exists right now, where companies can legally take countries to court for loss of profits. These corporate courts are the end result of a mechanism known as Investor-State Dispute Settlement, or ISDS. And they're included in over 3,000 trade and investment agreements, things like bilateral investment treaties, free trade agreements, multilateral investment agreements, investment contracts, all of that stuff. Now, while ostensibly providing a sense of security to foreign investments, by agreeing to these mechanisms, politicians have cheerfully given foreign investors the power to challenge government decisions outside of national legal systems, essentially and dangerously elevating individual corporations to the same status as a sovereign government. So, if you were looking at this and thinking, hang on, I don't think ISDS is really about protecting investment at all, but actually consolidating and formalizing corporate power, you'd be right. Yet currently, nearly all countries are signatories to at least one international investment agreement that includes ISDS. When people find out about them, they hate them, obviously. Yet many governments claim that such clauses are necessary for economic development because they convince investors those poor, tremulous, nervous investors, that their assets won't be arbitrarily seized without compensation. It doesn't matter that those investors will happily use the same ISDS mechanisms to arbitrarily seize the assets of an entire sovereign state whenever they don't get their way, because in the shopocracy, the customer can fuck off. As you might expect, these tribunals, when they take place, are secret. Shh. No shit. Nothing screams above board like closed doors and an utter lack of transparency. And they don't happen in a single permanent court. Obviously, again, I mean, you wouldn't want people protesting outside your openly fraudulent international legalized theft shindig every day, would you? Instead, they are ad hoc proceedings, usually held in neutral international arbitration venues in places like Washington, London, Paris, or Geneva. You know, the big places. And they have been used to attack things that corporations see as bad for business, like climate action and environmental protections and labor rights. Because as we all know, absolutely nothing is worse for business than human happiness and health for everyone. And as a result, governments have been forced to pay out billions in compensation to corporations, money often taken from public budgets that are intended for social services, infrastructure, climate action. And on top of that, governments have also been forced to drop progressive policies completely, because even if a government can successfully defend one of these cases, it still faces legal costs of around like $5 million per case, as ISDS tribunals often make countries pay for the tribunal costs. So simply being accused by a corporation is an immediate drain on the treasury. The result is something called regulatory chill. And no, that's not a bunch of financial lawyers and legislators kicking back on beanbags, toking on joints rolled up in palm-sized contract papers, and getting the munchies because the PowerPoint is showing a pie chart. Regulatory chill refers to governments hesitating or outright failing to introduce new domestic or international laws because they're scared that those policies might trigger expensive lawsuits. The UK, by the way, has more than 80 treaties in place containing provisions for these corporate courts. But don't hold your breath waiting for the apparently sovereignty-obsessed Tory or Reform parties to kick up a fuss about that kind of foreign interference or rulemaking, because the people financing those parties are often the ones doing the suing. Look, of course, I get the idea that there has to be some level of protection, but it should be mutual. It should go both ways. However, as it stands, these mechanisms are written in one way and one way only, to benefit solely the corporations, and to both allow and encourage them to fleece countries while utterly fucking over everyone else. Thankfully, incredibly even, a lot of countries are finally beginning to call time on these bullshit mechanisms by terminating or restricting ISDS in their trade agreements, and the EU, in fact, is actively phasing it out. Which is a wise move, since ISDS would definitely have been part of any of the big tech contracts and deals coming up in the near AI-saturated future. But phase out or not, the fact that these things exist at all demonstrates just how much power has been put into the hands of a rapacious class of big-headed shopkeepers with delusions of grandeur. Honestly, how could it have turned out any other way? We've sanctified the markets, made heroes and idols of CEOs, and we've watched our democratically elected officials undemocratically bend the knee to the primacy of business. Politics no longer even pretends to be about the administration of social structures, but instead is all about serving the needs of corporations, of shops, albeit shops with overinflated egos. The measure of national success is nothing to do with the well-being of the population, but how well the corporations are doing. And somehow, the people running the shops, who are, of course, mostly men, have convinced themselves that hawking lots of shit has made them masters of the universe, to the point where now they can dictate who gets to run other shops, or even what shops are allowed to exist, especially if any new shops aim to compete with their own business. Again, So much for healthy competition. Look at big oil, the major fossil fuel shops. And it's important that we insist on calling these entities shops instead of corporations. Calling them corporations feeds the cultural delusion that they are deeply meaningful, supremely impactful organizations, instead of what they are: shops. Just fucking shops. Anyway, fossil fuel shops use their financial clout and political funding power as donors to influence government policy, to fuck with potential renewable energy providers, because they know if renewables take off, well, that would put them and their fossil fuel shops out of business. It's funny, no? How the fossil fuel shopkeepers will happily lay off thousands of employees because market forces or whatever, but don't like it when the very same market forces threaten them with their own medicine. Anyway, the fossil fuel shops spend millions on lobbying and political contributions in order to interfere with policy or delay the transition to renewables, targeting regulations or outright buying politicians, influencing elections and shaping legislation, rigging the market so that renewable energy providers are forced to pay higher fees and face bigger obstacles when it comes to leasing public land, for example. Just so they can be the only shop on the street, and therefore force the public to pay whatever exorbitant prices they can charge because, well, we're not permitted an alternative. Now look at how Apple uses its App Store to essentially rig the market by creating high barriers to entry for competitors, using its review policy as a means to strangle competition from apps that provide similar services to its own, and charging up to 30% commissions on digital goods and subscriptions, going out of its way to hurt other developers. And Apple are hardly outliers when it comes to big tech shops. Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, they all employ these structural advantages, strategic acquisitions, and aggressive business tactics to essentially shatter both established and emerging competition. Shit, now that I think about it, I guess the one thing that shops hate more than their customers is other shops. Now, don't get me wrong. I like shops. I know it sounds like I don't, but I do. I like shops. I like going inside them to browse and look around. I like to take my time over what I end up bringing home with me. And I have my favorite stores. I have the bookshops and coffee shops I always go to, where I know the people there, like the customers and the staff, and they know me. I don't want those shops to disappear. But those shops are a world away from what all right, just for the sake of differentiation, let's call them corporations, have become. The corporate shops have become huge, faceless monoliths that only take and take and take and give nothing in return. So bloated on profit and their own sense of importance that they believe themselves to be gods worthy of tribute. No, actually scrap that. Not worthy, just demanding. They demand tribute and obeisance. Worthiness doesn't come into it. In fact, worthiness, like human health and happiness, is bad for business. Worthiness is for suckers. Who the fuck needs that? We don't. What we need are what shops used to be at the local level. Hubs, places of connection, places of the community that serve the community. What I don't want is a world where uppity shopkeepers think that they can call the shots because they turned a profit, where CEOs tell our elected representatives what to do and what laws to enact, what kind of air we breathe, what kind of water we drink, a world where business is elevated above all else. What I don't want is a shopocracy. What I don't want is a world where I might face legal action from Starbucks for having the temerity to order a cappuccino in Costa. Because it's a very short step from there to Nestle telling me who I can fuck.